I just wanted to make a really quick video. This isn't going to be going over everything, but this is ultimately discuss if your Jeep has a mystery coolant leak. You can't see it under the Jeep. You know, nothing under there. You can't see it, you know, off the water pump or, you know, anywhere else. It's just, it's not visible from the outside, but yet the Jeep still consumes coolant. So I put a new engine in my Jeep about 4 or 5 years ago. The old one had piston slaps, so I put this is a fresh long block. You can actually see the side is still painted all nice. But anyways, put a nice new long block in there by S&J Motors, and you know, did the break-in and everything. You know, basically just cranked the engine over. First primed it properly, but then made sure there was oil everywhere. But over the course of a year, I started noticing that it's going through coolant. So I thought it was the water pump, and to replace that, it wasn't a bad idea to replace it. Thought it was a thermostat housing. Replaced that because it was a good time to do it anyways. The radiator ended up breaking on its own, so I replaced that, and there's no signs of leaks from the heater core or anything like that. And I just couldn't make sense of why it was losing coolant. It wasn't a huge deal because it was like a quart every other month or so, but it was enough that it was concerning. And when I would check my oil, there was never any signs of coolant on it. The cap never had any signs of condensation on it. I just couldn't make sense of what the deal was. No smoking, compression was good, all that. And eventually I just kind of just accepted it. Well, maybe not accepted it, but just got tired of it. So as I went through this, I decided to do an oil test at one point just to see how the life of my engine was doing. And for what it's worth, the valve cover has never been off in the 4 years I've owned it. Put a new seal on it, forgot about it. New engine, shouldn't have to take it off. But anyways, I took the oil sample, and it said that there was signs of noticeable signs of coolant in my oil, which I thought was very surprising. And it said there was excess wear, stuff like that. So I just kind of kept that in the back of my mind, and I'm big on oil changes. This Jeep has had full synthetic changed arguably way too soon, but I'm okay with that because to protect my investment. Changed it probably every 3,000 or 4,000 miles, maybe 5 at a stretch, but still full synthetic, more than enough. And a couple weeks ago, after a trip with a buddy, I decided to pull the valve cover. Some leaks are starting to develop on this thing, so I figured maybe that the valve cover gasket was on the way out. So pull the cover, and first thing I notice is, disregard this. This is I've already fixed this issue by now. But what I noticed was right inside here where these little coolant plugs are. This goes into the cylinder head. There'd be nice little like drops of green right in the threads. You'd see it just sitting on each and every single one. There's 4 of them. That's kind of visible. So I noticed that there was coolant in each of the threads, and which honestly, I was pretty happy to see that, because then that means I knew my leak. And the fact that I'm seeing it from the threads, you know, right there, rather than between cylinders 3 and 4, like the 0331 head crack, because this is a 2000. I was seeing it from the plugs, so that confirmed my leak. And what I did moving forward was I put the valve cover on back then. I was feeling sick at the time, but what I ultimately moved to do was I pulled the valve cover again, I don't know, a few months later. And also the sludge on the engine was really bad, way worse than it should ever be, especially given that this has always had full synthetic. I mean, this is how it looked all over right here. In fact, there's a better view that shows how bad it was. And it's still working down, but like this, you can see the you know, slime all over it. That's how the entire engine looked on every single surface, even the rockers. So what I ended up doing was a little more work than I needed to do, but it was very easy work and still worthwhile. I pulled the each of the rockers one by one and made sure, absolutely 110% sure, that this rocker stayed at cylinder 1, stayed with this push rod, and the orientation was the same, the bracket orientation was the same. Just made sure that if I took it off, it was going on the same orientation. It's very critical. Anyways, so I took them off and just cleaned them up, just to get the sludge off them, because they were really bad. And then when I went through, eventually as I got to one of these, I did have to drain the coolant a little bit. Keep in mind that this is your coolant hose and it's quite a bit higher. What that means is if you remove a plug, a lot of coolant's going to drain through there. So this would be a perfect time for a coolant flush. if you identify that there is coolant coming past the threads on there. But what I did was I just drained off some coolant, that was fine. But drained off the coolant, and then I just put a 1/2-inch extension in there, loosened it up, and cleaned off the threads a little bit with a wire brush. And then I got this permatex thread sealant, which I can't remember which one it is, but a thread sealant rated for coolant and oil. And it's not necessary, it's just, it was a little bit of security. I mean, these are pipe threads, so it's not needed, but it was just a little bit of added, you know, peace of mind. And then I removed these, put a little bit of thread sealant around those casting plugs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and installed them again, one by one, just slowly going through the engine, and tighten them up. I can't remember the torque spec. It's a pipe thread, so I think torque spec is usually based off of like some minimum torque threshold and then angle, something like that. I ended up going to like 45 foot-pounds. Maybe that was too much, maybe that was too little. But put the engine back together using the same gasket because it was good. Tightened everything down and ran the Jeep for like 100 miles. And one thing to note was that I put ATF in there. I think just Dexmark or ATF plus 4, whatever it was. Just put a single quart in there for the 4 quarts or whatever it was of oil. Basically, whatever the oil capacity is, replace 1 quart with ATF. And I probably put 300 miles on the ATF, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Drove to the beach, maybe drove around a little longer than I should have, but anyways, drove around for a while and came back and checking it out today, and the white stuff is a thread sealant, so that's not a leak. No coolant, and it was very apparent when there's coolant. No coolant, no coolant, no coolant. So the coolant leak issue was resolved. And for me, that was my mystery leak. Could be, you know, anywhere else. Maybe you have a bad hose that's only leaking when it's warmed up, or thermostat housing, water pump, radiator, or something. But for me, I couldn't find it, and the easy check was to check inside the plugs. I've been pretty blown away with how well the ATF did for such, you know, little use. I think I got about this use after about 100 miles, and it started leveling out. So I feel like if it was just kind of in there for a little longer, which the only issue I had with the ATF is, my understanding is it's more equivalent to a 0W20, so it does thin out the oil. And I did notice that when I would idle or be at lower RPMs, the oil pressure was a little lower than I wanted. It still maintained the 13 psi, but on the highway it'd be lower than the 30 psi minimum if I was at really low RPM. But so if I had to do it again, I would do a 10W40 or 1540 with the ATF, and I feel like the oil pressure would be perfect. But I'm not an oil expert, I'm just saying what worked for me. The ATF did a good job cleaning up the engine. I'm still gonna run it in here periodically. It did a fantastic job. You can see just the difference between there and there. That's likely where the oil's draining down and had more contact. But if this was in here for probably about 2 or 3 months, I'm willing to bet it would clean up fantastic. But yeah, just hopefully a real quick video to say that if you have a mystery leak, check those plugs there. Make sure they're tight. It wouldn't be a good idea if they're loose. You know, check them out. But hopefully this helps. Fixed my issue, and I have a tracer dye on my coolant, which actually made it easier to find. But I went to the beach, and you can see the level is just a touch above. Sorry, the flash isn't working right. You can see it's just a touch below the upper limit. I went to the beach, I broke the cap off this. That was splashing out. I could see it on here. So I've driven 500 miles and it's lost the same amount of coolant that it would normally in a few days. So it's remarkably better. Also, when I noticed this, one last thing, hopefully, is that that if you let yours go on long enough and there's sludge in there, it's really worth pulling the oil pan. When I pulled my oil pan, there was so much sludge in the engine. It was at the very bottom. Somehow I wasn't able to see it when I changed my oil, but it was like suspended little green droplets. I think it'd be a really great idea to pull that, wipe it down, you know, do whatever's needed, or you could probably get away with regular oil changes, new filters, and some ATF. But that's what worked great for me.